Michael, did you try to reach? Okay.
Ready? Yeah, go ahead. All right, welcome everybody to the CCWD Calaveras County Water District Special Board Meeting of Wednesday, May 3rd. It's 1 p.m. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Becca, can you take roll, please?
Director Thomas,
I'm here.
Director Underhill,
Yes.
President Ratterman,
Here.
and currently Director Davidson and Cicada are absent. Oh.
And Director Davidson is on his way, you said? Okay. He'll join us when he gets here.
And I apologize, President Ratterman, I forgot to mention this to you before the meeting, but if we could change the order of the new business. And I will do the.
Look, 4A and 4B?
Yeah, actually, never mind. It was agendized the way we. It's perfect as it is. Sorry about
Okay.
that.
How about that, Becca? Perfect.
But who is Michelle Maitland?
That is my French cousin.
Okay. Okay, Frenchie. Right, can you take roll? Oh, we already did that. Public comment. Item number 2 on our agenda. At this time, members of the public may address the board on any non-agendized item. The public is encouraged to work through staff to place items on the agenda for board consideration. No action can be taken on matters not listed on the agenda. Comments are limited to 3 minutes per person. Do we have any public comment today? Anyone online with their hand up? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to our consent agenda. We have 3A, the minutes of our board meeting from April 12th, an action item.
Move for approval.
Second.
Okay, we got a motion and a second. Becca, you take roll?
Director Thomas,
Yes.
Director Underhill,
Yes.
President Ratterman.
Yes. Okay, item 4A on our agenda, discussion regarding cost of service and financial analysis study, public outreach. Michelle Minkler.
I've been called worse. Daily. So I want to give a quick, we're not presenting the full, the rollout of our public outreach presentation that we'll be working on. But I did want to give the board an update on, or just an overview of what kind of the general strategy is. I do think this is probably also a good opportunity to introduce our new external affairs manager. So John Osborne is here, started on Monday.
Welcome, John.
And we've been piling on ever since. So we're really glad to have him, and really excited to just take advantage of all of his talents. We know him well from his role as the director of the Office of Emergency Services in Calaveras County. So we're just really grateful to have him on the CCWD team. And what a time to start as an external affairs manager. Right?
Did you get a video or pictures of the line out his door with people?
No,
No.
we're still working on that. But
Yeah.
It's been I imagine probably a bit of an overwhelming week already. I don't know. How's it feel?
No, it's exciting. I'm pleased to be here and a little bit of drinking from water hose or hose, but that's kind of what I'm accustomed to. So I look forward to joining the team and being able to express the good things that we do here day in and day out, and managing our external affairs and building partnerships.
Could John come to the mic?
Sure.
Okay, now can you say that all over again?
Yes, sir. I'm grateful for the opportunity to be here. GM Minkler said it best. We've gotten to know each other over the last 3 or 4 years. Through that partnership, this opportunity presented itself, and I'm super excited to be here. It hasn't been super overwhelming, but it's only Wednesday. I'm really looking forward to getting up to
I'm
speed
listening
and
to a
being
meeting. Oh my gosh.
useful member
Thank
of
you.
the team.
Cindy, would you mind muting your phone? No, got it.
And really being able to celebrate the good work that goes on here every day, and continuing to express our plans for the future, and working through our strategic plan. That was yesterday, and I look forward to it. Thank you.
Yeah, and John was at the EPOC meeting this morning, which is
right.
a great, I think, first public outreach event to participate in. It's it's just such a great community and great
Yeah.
group of people up there.
I don't get into OES a lot, but how long were you in that position?
I was in that position 3 years and about 10 months.
And you've been in the county since
Actually,
you were born?
yes, since I was born, I've been in a county.
You were in Yuba, I remember that.
Actually, I started, I have about 24 years in working for small rural municipalities, and most recently the county. I spent about 20 years as a peace officer. And that's where I kind of got the taste for emergency management. I served in that role at a couple of different pop shops, and got the opportunity to come down here a few years ago. And after about 6 months of doing the long commute, we moved the family down here, and we bought a place here in the county. And we've been invested in Calaveras County since. We're happy to be here. It's very similar to where both my wife and I grew up, in the foothills, just a little further north. So,
Well, as I said to you, welcome.
Thank you.
And we look forward to working with you, and in particular, because
I appreciate it, Bertha. Thank you for the phone call the other day. It was gracious. And I look forward to carrying forth our vision of telling our story. So thank you.
thank you.
Well, thank you, John. We look forward to working with you.
You're welcome.
Wait.
I don't, we really shouldn't be carrying this thing on. It's not an agendized item. We're in the middle of our agenda. Are you extending yourself to the end of the meeting?
I can certainly be here at your service.
Or was that the plan? Or go ahead quickly, Russ.
You've become very dictatorial. This
Trying
is
to
supposed
follow-
to
trying to
be
follow the rules.
a democracy here. So no, I just the first time and only time I've heard you make a presentation was at your sponsored event at Murphy's, the
Region 3.
Region 3 thing. And when I heard that you might be coming here, I thought, holy cow, we hit a home run on that one. And then I heard a rumor that you might be a rodeo judge.
That rumor is true, sir.
Okay. Well, I think that is a unique qualification for the job you signed up for here.
Comes in handy when dealing with elected boards.
Well, on any given day, I would think that there might be a rodeo that would break out spontaneously around here. So I don't know. I just, I'm as pleased to have you here as you are seemingly pleased to be here. So welcome.
Thank you.
So that does fit into that first agenda item, though. It says keep tracking there, because John obviously is going to be a huge part of this outreach effort, along with Kelly and the whole rest of our team. Really, the way we handle our town hall meetings is going to carry forward. As it's always a team effort. So we have such a great team here, and getting everybody's perspective and giving the public the opportunity to hear from all of our different experts and representatives is just, I think, a successful strategy we will carry forward. We do already have some materials. I don't know if you guys saw the Facebook post that was up when we announced this meeting on Friday. Was the first time we rolled out a promotional, or I don't know what the right term for it is, but
No, I don't think that's a.
educational document that Jessica had prepared actually before she left. And really, I think it's a great tool that we'll continue to reuse as we go through this process, because it really kind of just identifies the major milestones along the way of a Prop 218 process. Because part of this is education. A big part of it is education, and not just what we do and what the rates are going towards and how we do it, but what the Prop 218 process is, what our constraints are in terms of how we do our financial planning, how we spend money, how we can generate revenue, and all of the different, constraints that we have on us. I think it's a big part of the discussion so that our ratepayers understand, why we operate the way that we do. And so that will continue to fall back to that same diagram, I think, and point out where we are in the process along the way. We're really committed to getting public input. I think Ralph made a really great point at our finance committee meeting on Friday, I think it was, when he said, that we need to make sure when we go and get input from the public, that we're doing it at a point in the process where there's still opportunity to act on that feedback that we get from the public. And so we're mindful of that. We want to be, we've already received some feedback on this process since it really rolled out on Friday. And at every turn, I'm inviting people to come to our finance committee meetings because we are a public agency. We are an open book. We go into the weeds of it every month in those meetings. And I think the more public participation we have and the more exposure that the public has to our operations, the better off we are. Help people understand what all of these funds are, the constraints that we have, the pressure that we have internally and from outside sources to meet our obligations.
So if I understand you correctly, what we're going to be doing is a readout of the whole process of how we get to, new rates if we
Exactly.
if we do. Because, so many times you get notification in the newspaper, this is what your new rate is.
Right.
And you're flabbergasted.
Yeah.
Like I was flabbergasted about our garbage.
Oh, right.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
We're not the
85
only Prop 218 process in the county right now.
Yes, 85% increase
Yeah.
in garbage. And so anyway, okay, so that's what
We're gonna do as much as we can. Yeah, we're gonna try to inform the public early and often and regularly throughout the process. And then once the current schedule has the rate notices going out in July, I believe it is, mid to late July. And then not before the board for adoption until mid-September. And so we're targeting a week in mid-August where, the sweet spot is we want people to have had an opportunity to review the rate documents prior to our public hearing or public outreach effort. But also far enough in advance of the rate hearing to where we can act on that information and the input from the public. So we're looking at mid-August where our rate consultant, who's online today, but he'll be in person for some of these meetings. Where we're going back out and doing more town hall style meetings to really make sure the public is informed of what the process is and what the impacts are. So high level overview for now. I just wanted to make sure that the board is aware that that's still a high priority for us. And we'll probably, we'll continue rolling out those materials just on an ongoing basis, going forward from now on.
There are surprises along the way. We try as best we can to notify people in advance. We didn't schedule this meeting until we decided to do that at the last meeting of the regular board meeting last week. and you see people writing comments in the social media those ways that they can post that CCWDs, that they're not being transparent, that that's going to be a big challenge for us. That as best you try, and I don't know, maybe we should take turns with like a sandwich board down at the corner of Highway 4 and 49.
49.
Yeah, just to make sure people get the message.
Or maybe the sign spinning, you could learn how to.
Oh, yeah.
a spot sign.
Yeah.
No, it's a real challenge, and that's why when we announced this meeting, it wasn't just the normal, email it out to the distribution list. It was posting that diagram on Facebook that let people know where we are in the process and that this is what we're talking about. And yeah, we're just going to continue doing more and more of that.
But that diagram that you're talking about, that was a very professionally done thing. Jessica did that step by step by step.
And Rebecca and Kelly, I believe, was involved in that. We had multiple in-house staff that were working on that.
That looked like it must have been borrowed from the Proposition 218 website or something, but it was nicely done. Then
we should make sure our name's on it in case anybody else does try. They can license it if they want. Okay, any other questions or comments on public outreach? Okay, we can touch on that more too as we move forward into the next time.
Okay, that's 4A. Michael, are you complete with 4A with your public out? Okay. Item 4B, discussion directions regarding the cost of service and financial analysis study. Jeffrey Meyer.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the board, members of the public. I want to do a couple introductions before I start. Obviously, if you're on the finance committee, and even last October, Habib Isaac from IB Consulting gave you a kind of like a rate study 101 class, but he's joining us today, as well as Eric Scriven of NHA Advisors. I think you remember Eric from past work he's done with us. I'm really happy and pleased that he has is helping us. One of the things that when Michael and I got into this process and looked at the model and what we're going to need to be able to move forward, especially with our CIP program, is that it looks like we're going to need to issue additional debt. And one of the components, obviously, is to make sure the district is in the best position to issue that debt. And that's where I brought NHA in, because they've helped us in the past in doing debt issuances, whether it's a refinancing or such. But I called upon Eric Leslie Bloom, who is joining us online, is also part of NHA, and they're helping go through this process. They know Habib, have worked with him in the past, so I think we've got a really good coordinated group effort to be able to go through this process. So and Eric will come up and make some comments, and Leslie as well a little bit later on, but I wanted to make sure introductions were out of the way. Second thing I want to do is I want to clarify the staff report that is in front of you, the one here that I put in for this rate study. And under this summary section, I stated on the second sentence, under the guidelines of Prop 218, the district rate plan must be reviewed at a minimum of every 5 years to determine the adequacy of existing rates to support the system. Actually, a rate study is not required every 5 years. It is required if you're going to do a rate adjustment. And that's what we're looking at as far as determining if there has to be an adjustment. However, a rate study every 5 years is best practice. You really need to take a snapshot in time of where you are. Does your rate structure adequately provide the resources for both your operating and your capital improvement program? That's why we do it every 5 years. It's not required under Prop 218, but if you are going to adjust your rates, you must have a rate study to justify those rate increases or any rate changes. So I just wanted to clarify that statement.
Okay, because it says cost of service, so it's the same thing.
Same thing, cost
Yeah.
of service, financial analysis. As Michael spoke to you earlier and talked about that diagram, this diagram here, a rate study is an iterative process as you go step by step by step. And the data compilation we've been working on, right now we're in step 2, financial plan. And this is what we've worked with Habib and his group to develop, and he's developed the financial plan based on our inputs and a lot of back and forth. Those inputs are not only on the operating plan, but detailed capital improvement plan on both the water and the sewer side. And so that's where we are right now. Then when we get into the next phase, once we move past this, it is a cost of service, it's the rate design, which you were talking about. So that's what we're in the process of. And there's many steps that we need to take before we get to the final end of it, which is a Prop 218 hearing. And this is where we're engaging not only your board, but the public, explaining where we are, getting input each step, because every step builds upon the prior step. So we're in the process of reviewing the financial plan. Habib will be able to discuss that with us. Eric can chime in a little later on, talk about issuing debt to make sure your board, goes back and kind of remembers what we need to do to be able to issue debt and some of the requirements. So at this point, if there are no other questions, one more thing. I'm sorry. We did bring this to the Finance Committee last Friday. Director Adaman was there, and Cindy Cicada, Director Cicada, joined by remote. So they've seen this, and you're going to see this presentation as well.
Okay, my question is on your data compilation. You've taken into consideration any changes that you had with the initial data? I mean, things happen.
Yes.
Figures change. And so we are guaranteed that the data that you're submitting is number one.
Yes, ma'am. And what we did is they used past information from prior years. They got our audit to be able to pull that in for last fiscal year. But we also used in this budget, we went back and looked at things that are jumping out at us. CPPA rates. They have adjusted that. Chemical rates, they have adjusted that as a baseline, the same way with fuel costs. So those numbers have been updated. And then from that point on, it has cost increases, inflationary factors to adjust for. So we looked at those 3 items that were real anomalies that just really jumped out. So that has been taken into account in this financial plan.
Which brings up another question. What are you going to do for adjustment of those same figures 6 months from now? Because there's going to be changes again.
Yes. And one of the things that this model allows us to do, and I'll let Habib really get into the discussion on that, is that there are inflationary factors that are built into the model. And his inflationary factors for next fiscal year, 23-24, are high, but then it trickles down in future years. So he's looking at next year being another high inflationary year. But then the models based on what we see and what the Feds say is it's leveling out. So he is accounting for more cost increases that are coming about.
The other thing I would add to that, Jeff, if I could real quick, is, because I think Jeff framed it correctly at the outset, that really it's a snapshot in time, which makes it hard because we're trying to project out 5 years with a whole bunch of uncertainty. And we have to fix the projections, the model at some point based on the best information that we have now. So we can't continuously adjust that unless, if there's a big significant change that we can adapt to during this process, we will. But 6 months from now, we hopefully we're in a new rate schedule. If there's changes after that, we, in the best case scenario, we have, inflation decreases, we're able to, cut costs or whatever it might be, and we don't need it to implement as high of a rate increase as we've approved here. Or alternatively, if revenue is short and costs continue to increase, or we have unexpected additional new costs, the only way to adapt to that new information at that point would be to go through another Prop 218 process.
Is there,
so-
is there any, industry, is there any industry, metric out there that will give us an estimation of what, inflation will be over the next 5
We
years?
should probably let Habib address that.
Yes,
Yeah.
and he's built in those estimates, engineering reports, he's built in escalators for CIP projects. And he's done the work as far as what are the standard inflationary factors that the world is using today.
Okay, great.
Habib, are you there?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah,
Okay.
go ahead.
great.
Floor is yours.
Are you going to share
Fantastic.
your screen? Or would you like
Uh,
us to do?
Rebecca's gonna.
Yeah, Rebecca's gonna do it because
Bring it
this
over.
is that day where I was at a board meeting, so
Sure.
I'm out of pocket.
We're getting there.
Nope, I see it. All right, so some of the stuff I'm gonna reiterate that Jeff mentioned through this presentation, and then please let me know if you have questions even during the presentation, because the more that this is a dialogue, the better. I think there's
Rebecca's
handouts
just
now.
handing out your PowerPoint right now.
Okay, all right, great.
Ready?
Yes,
It's all
I am.
yours, Habib.
All right, go ahead and go to that next slide, please. And this is just the agenda that we're going to go through today. And this is what we went through with the finance committee. I'm going to talk briefly about just what goes into financial planning. Then some of our key assumptions to this project. Then we'll go through the water enterprise, look at its current financial outlook based on existing rates, as well as where you want to be based on meeting reserves and your capital spending. Do the same thing with wastewater, and then talk about next steps. So, but this is all focused right now on the financial plan. So think of it, this is the health of the utility as a whole of each enterprise. And we're not going to be showing you rates at all today. We already have the whole rate model and everything completed, but we don't want to focus on rates today because that's a lot to absorb. And that requires its own separate workshop. So does the financial plan. So I want to make sure we go through a financial plan. You understand the levers that you have. And then when we get to rates at another meeting, if you want to make some adjustments to how the rates came out, and when you make adjustments to rates, then you'll know what levers are being impacted on the health of the utilities. Okay. So with that, go ahead and let's go to the next slide, please. And then go ahead and click, do a click, there you go. So one thing that we do when we work with staff, and we work with staff for numerous months, rate studies typically take 6 to 12 months to get completed, but we go through all the line item expenses of both utilities. We look at the budget. I get a good understanding of the agency's budget, the debt, how rates are constructed, any type of debt coverage, as well as any items. We focus on a couple years of actuals plus the budget. And then we look at items that seem to vary quite a bit between the years and ask the reason why. So we don't just take that information, pop it in and call it done. We question staff of why did this line item go up so much, or why did it decrease? So we identified that all the way through. So we put Jeff on the spot, and we're not auditors, but we do question and ask these type of items to make sure that we're capturing everything. Go ahead, next slide. And then with also the other thing we do, which wasn't mentioned, besides making looking at your financial plan, and if you need to do adjustment due to you need more revenue, the other thing that what's best practice, why you want to do a rate study every 5 years, is because usage trends change. How much usage single family uses compared to non-residential, the amount of usage within the tiers, all that changes over time. And if you let too long of a time period lapse, then you might see some drastic customer impacts from just updating the rate study to reflect current day versus 10 years ago. So that's very important as well. And we took all that information, we looked at the usage, and then we incorporate that into the modeling. Next click. And then with revenue projections, similarly, we don't rely on your budget numbers for what the revenue is. We take all the raw data from your billing system, and we get the number of accounts by meter size, the customer classes, the tiers. We incorporate the usage, and then we identify or we recalculate your revenue, and then we compare it to your last year's actuals. And then in general, from an industry standpoint, when we look at water utilities, you want to be within 3% in general, because you typically there's still a lot of revenue coming in from the variable side. You guys are somewhat unique where you have about 70% of your revenue coming on the fixed side. So then we want to have even a tighter variance, which is within 2%, which we achieved. And now wastewater, since most of it is fixed cost recovery coming in through flat rates, we want to be within 1%. And in both of these utilities, we are within that variance. And then what that tells us is we captured all units of service. We have all your accounts. We have all the data, and we are calculating the revenue correctly. If we're really far off, like say 10% off, then we'll dive in more. Why are we off by so much? We shouldn't be. Did we receive all the data? Are we missing information? Do we misinterpret one of the rates? So it almost like its own initial QA/QC right from the get-go. So we've done that as part of our due diligence. Go ahead. And then this is a big item, not just for Calaveras County Water District, but for every single utility. Utilities are very, very capital intensive. And the unfortunate thing is that it's not seen by your constituency, right? It's under the ground, but it's most of the cost is related to capital. And then if you don't spend the money on capital, then you're probably going to be addressing emergencies. So it's very important to fund your capital, repair and replacement to maintain a very healthy, safe system for providing water and wastewater as well. Next one. And then lastly, besides covering your operating costs and your capital spending, reserves is also an expense. So you want to make sure that you have healthy reserves, so you have a strong financial outlook to meet your bond covenants, your debt coverage, and also to ensure that you have funds available to continue with your capital projects and not have to stop or pause because you're waiting for revenue to come in. So that gives you like a framework of everything that we look at when we're going into utility rate studies.
I
Next
have a
slide.
question. I have a
Yes.
question. When you started, you said you used 70%. Will you please elaborate on that? We had.
Oh, sure. Yes, we recalculate your revenue, and then based on your current fixed charges that has a base plus an R&R component that's fixed, the total amount of revenue that comes from your fixed charges by meter size recovers 70% of all your revenue for the water utility.
Mm-hmm.
So that's so because so much comes from the fixed side, we want there's not much on the variable side. We want our variance to be that much smaller when we compare our calculated revenue to your 2022 actuals.
Go ahead, Jeff.
Yes, just to follow up on that, and I know we've had this discussion in the past. The higher percentage of revenues that are fixed, like our base rates, it insulates you from drought instances. When people reduce consumption and consumption goes up, it allows us better stability when we're projecting our budgets and actually receiving revenues, because the larger portion of rate revenue that's fixed, we know we're going to get it. The consumptive can always change. And I think that's a discussion we've had over the years where we are. And actually, we're kind of different than most of the agencies, especially in the early 2010s, where a lot of them were trying to be forced to look more on the consumptive side to get their revenue. Is that correct, Habib?
Yes, that's correct. Before the mandatory conservation, usually the rule of thumb was to be around 30% fixed cost recovery. But since the mandatory conservation 2015, most agencies are trending upward. And I would say the average now is really in the 40s of where agencies are. And you're definitely on the high end of the fixed cost recovery, which is a good thing.
And that was part of our strategy in our last, last rate study. Because of the drought, we had lost so much money. People asked people to quit using water and they actually did. And we lost a lot of money. So we redid our rates to that, we're gonna gain most of our funds through the fixed part of it, and the variable part, when they did decide to decline using water, that it wouldn't hurt us as bad as it had in the previous 5 years.
I just had one more question, and that was on reserve funding. Do
Yes.
I remember a percentage that we have in reserve?
Well, reserves are made up of many separate reserves. So we have the operating reserve, which is 90 days of operating expenses. We have the capital replacement reserve, which typically we want to have a year's worth of capital spending in your coffers. And then we have the rate stabilization reserve, which is typically a percentage of rate revenue that comes in.
Okay, but what I was asking is that we don't have a percentage that we put into reserves against all of our expenses.
Go ahead, Habib.
We have minimum targets for those three reserves, and then collectively, the way we want to solve this financial plan is to make sure that your revenues are sufficient to not only fund your expenses and your capital, but also achieve a fund balance that is greater than the minimum reserve requirements related to operating capital and rate stabilization. And I will show that in a later slide.
Is our capital spending, is that, the reserve on that, is that dictated by our loan to debt ratio that we have to maintain, or is that separate?
No, that's separate.
Okay, any further questions? Go
Yeah,
ahead.
Habib, this is Director Thomas.
Yes.
I hear continuing references to looking for anomalies. Yeah, I'm comforted by the fact that you say that in comparison to other agencies, the fact that we get 70% of our revenues from our rates as compared to some others that get 40 or thereabouts. Do you also look for anomalies across the board, about how we compare to other nearby agencies or agencies that you're working with I would just suspect that you would look at what are we spending on our fleet? What are we spending, just looking for some figures that don't make any sense.
Well, on that, not too much. Like we do rate surveys to show like where are your rates landing compared to your neighboring agencies. That will be part of the rate workshop that we'll come forward with later on in a couple months. But we do look at what is your level of capital spending compared to the size of your utility, in terms of the size of your utility from a revenue standpoint, the size of your utility in relation to your asset value, as well as just the amount that's possible to process with your staffing in a year. So those are the type of questions that we ask as well. That's separate from just looking at the numbers. And that was something that caused many iterations of the CIP.
Okay, well, the most frequent comment that I hear out in the neighborhoods is that I came from San Jose and you guys charge a lot more than I was used to paying for in San Jose, and I just want to make sure that we have an adequate way at the end of all this to explain to people in detail why it is that we have to be higher than San Jose or
Yeah.
Sunnyvale or someplace.
We have
So
13,000. Water.
I,
Yeah,
costs
one-
I understand that.
$500,000.
I understand that, but I just listen to what I'm saying. I think that that's going to be the most um, challenged or the most challenging thing about all this is just to make sure that the people who doubt that our figures are accurate, that we just need to be able to explain it in detail, not just, well, we've got 13,000 and they've got a 500,000. That doesn't make any sense to the average person. So does to me.
We'll be prepared.
You're not average.
Yeah,
I'm not
so
average?
definitely, you definitely, you don't take advantage of the economy of scale. But we will be showing in detail what expenses need to be paid for, what's the level of capital expending, what are the big projects, why do we need them? So those items are going to be in there where if properties or your constituent says, oh, well, we shouldn't fund that. There's going to be, your staff and your engineers saying why it's very necessary to do so, because we will call those out in our report.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. So here's some of the key assumptions that we utilize in our modeling. So first one, inflation that was touched on. For 2024, this upcoming fiscal year, we keep track of CPI in San Francisco, San Diego, LA. We also keep track of the Engineers News Record Construction Cost Index for 20 cities, San Francisco, and we keep track of it all the way back from like 1910 to today. And then we're using the current annual change for 24, which is fairly high. And then outside of 24, when we get to 25 and beyond, we then ratchet back down to the 5-year average of these two indices. And both of them are in like the mid to high 3%. But for this next year, we're still anticipating, this high inflationary climate. Was there a question right there?
No, it was a sneeze. Go ahead.
Oh, okay, thank you. And then, so that's fairly conservative. And then with growth, even though you may have growth coming online, you also have to think in the back of your mind, what is our job and what we're doing? And we're coming up with a financial plan, and we're going to be setting rates that is your ceiling that you're going to put in your Prop 218 notice. So we typically do not assume growth in our analysis to be conservative. Otherwise, if you do assume a certain amount of growth and that growth doesn't occur, then you're not going to meet your revenue needs. So, and then if it does happen, and then that means you're going to generate a little bit more revenue, which means you'll be able to outperform these projections, and you may not need to go up to the notice rate in those subsequent years. And we do annual updates for a lot of our clients where we come back in, we update everything, and then we identify, hey, I know we assumed, 10% increase for year 2, but it looks like you only need a 7% increase based on how things have worked out and so on and so forth. So that's something that could be a benefit on your end. And then when we come to the utility demand, this is just more disclosure. This is the amount of acre feet of sales that we're using based on 2022. We are looking at what the sales are looking like for 23 because it was a very wet season. We're accounting for that, but then 24, we're going back to the 2022 sales as a typical year. And then the EDUs, that's related to wastewater in terms of number of connections. And then on capital spending, your capital spending is more than your depreciation amounts. Water's 11 million a year, wastewater is around 7 million a year. You have a lot of outstanding big capital projects right now in the short term that you guys are addressing. And then because of that, and because of your level of revenue right now, we are anticipating to issue debt. And that's also why Jeff has brought in Eric Scriven and Leslie. And the level of debts, this would be in 2025, so not next year, but the year after. 16.5 million for water and 6 million for wastewater. And what that's doing is we're basically on a high level, we're leveraging debt to fund your capital in the short term while rates increase slowly over time. So then in the outer years, you're not reliant on having to issue debt to fund your capital. You can fund your capital on a pay-as-you-go basis with rate revenue. And then reserves, as I mentioned, we have a separate a slide for that, but we're gonna make sure that your reserves are fully funded. We're not gonna have that occur in the very first year, but we will make sure that it's building up slowly in a smooth transition where then you meet your reserves within this 5-year planning period. All right. Any questions on that?
No, this is the same as the finance committee. Any questions, my whole board will definitely just will speak up. You don't,
Okay.
don't need to stop and
Sound-
ask for questions. They're pretty
Thank you.
aggressive.
Thank you so much. All right, so now we're gonna go into water enterprise. Go ahead. So on the left-hand side, these are things that we think about in the back of our minds when we're looking at your current revenue from existing rates. We think about, we want to make sure that you have positive net income over your operating expenses, which doesn't include capital. We want to make sure that we're meeting your debt coverage calculations. We want to sufficiently fund all your capital needs, while at the same time we meet your reserve targets. Go ahead. So this first slide right here is your operating position. Well, so this black trend line going across, that's flat. That is your rate revenue or your total revenue from existing rates today, the rates that exist right now. And then that red dash line going across is your operating expenses, and then applying the inflationary adjustments to your operating expenses, which means your expenses are more than your current revenue. So you're running an operating deficit, and that's reflected in the light red bars at the bottom. So we want to make sure we resolve this and you get positive net income that then could go to your capital spending and fund your reserves. Go ahead. And then here's your capital spending. And this also shows your sources of today. So you have pretty significant capital costs. You do have some grant funds and some existing proceeds from the loan you recently received. The proceeds are reflected in the violet color. And then the dark purple is the amount that is funded by rates, by rate revenue. Go ahead, next slide. And then this is a reflection of your reserve balances after operating and absorbing that operating deficit, and after you fully fund your capital needs that were provided to us. So basically, you're below your minimum right now. And then because of the level of capital spending, you're also using your reserves to fund it, which then over time is not sustainable. And then, as I mentioned, that red trend line is your minimum reserve requirement, which includes operating, rate stabilization, capital replacement. And then the target line with the black dashes is just, instead of 90 days, 120 days, instead of 1 year capital, 2 years of capital, forward looking. So we want to be within that bandwidth. Next slide. So from our review of current rates, we definitely need revenue increases each year. We want to eliminate the ongoing operating deficit over the planning period. Reserves are already below the minimum. And here are your reserves. Your operating reserve is 90 days of O&M. Your capital reserves for the minimum is your annual depreciation amount. Rate stabilization is 10% of operating revenue, which essentially is your rates. You have emergency reserve, which is 3% of your assets. And emergency is different than capital. Think of emergency as your safety net for pipe burst, things of that sort, that then doesn't make you have to go and steal money from your ongoing typical R&R. So you're not pulling money from those funds. Those funds are set planning. The emergency isn't something you could anticipate. So it's separate funding for that. And then with all that collectively, your minimum requirement for 2024 is 11.1 million. So that was that red bar in 2024. So we want to make sure that we replenish that and we maintain it moving forward. Okay, moving on.
Go ahead, Abhi.
Yeah, I said go ahead and move along. I don't have control of the PowerPoint. Oh, I'm sorry,
It's-
we're here. Yeah, it just delayed a little bit. So here's on the left-hand side, we're gonna generate positive net income. We're gonna fully fund your capital needs, which is 54 million over the next 5 years. We're gonna issue debt to fund the capital in the short term. And as I mentioned before, that's gonna allow rates to increase over time and transition to pay-go funding for capital. The debt is 16.5 million in 24-25. And then we're also going to make sure that we meet debt coverage during that time period. Go ahead.
And if I could just interject a quick point here, and I swear we didn't script it this way, but I made the same point on Friday. But I just want to
Oh,
clarify
yeah.
that when we say fully fund capital needs
That's what I'm gonna
here,
talk about.
we're fully funding the capital improvement program that we provided to Habib, but through a very iterative, multiple rounds of revisions to that program, it's about half of what we've actually identified as critical infrastructure needs. But we have pulled a bunch of projects out, and we're committed to finding other ways to get those projects done as soon as possible, hopefully during the same time frame if possible. If not, we're deferring maintenance further beyond the 5 years. But we have a lot more capital needs than what is included in here. And so when we say fully funding the capital needs, we're fully funding the ones that are included in this plan. But we want to also be cognizant of the ones that aren't included in this plan that still need to be funded.
Because safety is your big issue.
Safety, reliability, regulatory compliance, those are the big drivers.
Should we change that text to fully fund our identified capital improvement plan? Or-
We could change the text, although so far it's worked well because it gives me an opportunity to clarify and talk about it a little bit more.
Yeah, I guess we're going to say it is scripted from now on.
Okay, sure.
But maybe what we could do is say, and maybe or maybe not this is a good term, but maybe we say we identified the most critical capital needs that is included in the planning period. Okay, so go ahead, moving forward. So to achieve this is the revenue adjustments that are needed, with 25% in the first year, followed by 16%. Go ahead. So in doing that, you see your rate revenue with that black trend line sloping up is definitely increasing. And then that generates positive net income above your operating expenses. So then that net income can now go towards your capital spending and allow you to fund your reserves as well. We also introduced another trend line here, which is that dashed line with the blue dots. And that is going off of the right axis, which is your debt coverage. And we want to be at 125% or more. But in 24, we're below that for your existing debt. So that's a little bit problematic. But we don't, and I think if we show to your banks, the people you got the loan from, that you're looking at updating your rates, and it's just this one-time occurrence, I believe you'll probably be okay. And actually, we just got revisions to your debt, and that went down just a little bit more. But 2024 is definitely a critical component. So that's something that is also driving the first year 25%. So besides capital funding, the other thing that are primary drivers in the beginning is that debt coverage and making sure that we have positive operating net income and not running an operating deficit. So those
Okay,
are
Habib,
three drivers right there.
Jeffrey Myers has a question or comment. Sorry.
This is just a quick one. Eric will be available for questions when you're talking about loan requirements, loan docs, and debt service coverage. So just to let you know, Eric can discuss that in greater detail after Habib finishes his discussion.
Yes,
Perfect.
and by no way am I an expert in that part. I'm pretty savvy with it, but definitely I would refer to Eric on those items. And next, oh, go ahead.
Habib, can I just go back over the three main drivers of those increases early on in the rate study, where you're to provide a positive net operating income, the capital funding, and the debt service coverage ratio. Did I get that correct?
That is correct. Yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, and I'd just add here too, because we've had some discussions about whether it's possible to even out the distribution of the revenue shortfall over the first couple of years, and it's a challenge because of that debt. Well, one of the main drivers,
Yes.
that debt service coverage ratio, and getting us into compliance, so we're not we're not jeopardizing the financial health of the district. But having said that, we're still working on whether there are options or alternatives that we could present that would even out that distribution a little bit. We'll bring that back as a part of the discussion when we present the rate design at the next board meeting.
And I have a comment on that, Michael. Thanks for bringing that up. The debt service coverage that we're talking about, I think the last debt that we took, the last loan that we took, the bond is still sitting. And I don't even know that we'll be using that in the next couple of years, in the first 2 years of these new proposed. The plan is to use it, but we may not be able to use it all. So anyway, just with that in mind, I'm going to guess that we're going to spend that money that's sitting here with the district prior to actually going out for new debt. Is that?
Yes,
is that not?
I think so. If we're going out in 25, because we're already cutting into those loan proceeds. We're
barely.
already using it. Yeah, we haven't used a lot yet, but we're about to put some significant projects out to bid. And so we're gonna put a big dent in it over the next couple of years, if not expend all of it in the next couple of years.
And we are in mid 23, and we're talking about a year and a half from now getting into 2025, and that will probably be dwindled down to nothing before we need to take new debt. And so if we are talking about this debt service coverage and debt service ratio, it's not going to occur while we still have money in the bank from our last debt.
Actually, it's a requirement we have right now.
But we will in the future too.
Right, but it's not based on the fact that the money's in the bank. It's the revenue. It's the comparison of the revenue to the amount of debt service.
And us going out for we're not going to go out for new debt until that's gone. We just established that, correct?
Right, but that doesn't impact the debt coverage calculation.
Okay.
And just to follow up on that, Eric and Leslie are going to give you a great explanation of how that calculation is made and the factors going into it.
Okay, and when Eric speaks, that's one of the things I'm going to be looking for, is how our last debt currently sitting waiting to be spent affects that debt ratio in between now and then.
Yes, that'll be discussed.
Spending the money has nothing to do with our debt coverage.
No, I realize that, but
Yeah.
it does depend on when we need to go out and take a new loan.
No, it's revenue versus whatever the debt service is. That's the coverage.
The need to take out a new loan is when we spent the last loan.
Well,
Maybe.
not necessarily, right? Because those funds are encumbered when the construction contracts are awarded. And so we're already, with the water loan, we're probably only going to fund 2 projects, maybe 3, but we're only going to fund a couple of projects with each of those on both the sewer side and the water side. And those funds are fully encumbered once the construction contract is awarded. So even if we're still spending down those loan proceeds, we may need to issue new debt in order to complete and implement other projects.
Got it. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, thank you so much. Yes, perfect. Let me just zoom in a little bit. All right, and then now this is your capital plan, but with now the new sources, which just introduces that additional debt that then allows you to fund to 2026 and a little bit of 27. But once you get to 27 and 28, you're now transitioning to be almost fully funded through rates instead of needing debt proceeds. So that was one of the other goals. Go ahead. And then this is now your ending reserves. Remember last time it was showing it depleting and going to deficits. Now That 2025 big spike is just the proceeds of the 16.5 million going into your capital reserve, because that's where your capital needs are expended. And then you draw it down because you have those big projects in that year. And then we make sure that those 16% basically levels it off. So then you're maintaining your above your minimum requirement through 2028. Now with that, I'm going to transition to wastewater. And I'm going to go through the same type of snapshots. Go ahead. So with wastewater, definitely different than water. Your current rate revenue is over your expenses. You are generating positive net income that could go to fund a portion of your capital spending. Go ahead. But your capital spending is still also pretty significant in the early years. You are using some of your existing loan proceeds and in a grant, some capacity fees for projects that are identified to provide expansion. So those are being utilized. And then the rest is rate funded, which is that dark purple. Next. Did you go forward or backwards? Should be a reserves. Okay, this must have been a previous iteration of the PowerPoint. I know the one for the Finance Committee included where the reserves were landing, but that's okay. We can keep moving forward. I could give you a summary of the results, and then I could go into the proposed financial plan that will show your reserve balances. Go ahead, next slide. So with current rates, the net income is decreasing. You're still positive, but it is decreasing, which is common when you set rates for 5 years. It's just part of Prop 218. You know, over time, eventually, as expenses increase over the years, you're going to, in our projections, net income is going to get less and less. And then your reserves are below the minimum. And then existing rates, reserves would be used to cover capital expenses. And again, that's not sustainable. That's not something that you could maintain over long term. Next slide. And I just heard a beep. I just want to make sure, can you guys still hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, great. So here's the proposed financial plan, similar to water. We want to generate positive net income. Go ahead. Go ahead. So with that, these are the revenue adjustments we need. It's lower than water because you already had positive net income, but we need a little bit more to cover that capital spending. And we're looking at 14%. And then you'll see it ratchet up your rate revenue. You generate more positive net income with those gray bars. And then with the wastewater utility, because it doesn't have the same level of debt, debt coverage isn't an issue when it comes to wastewater. So I would say another way, debt coverage isn't a primary driver to the revenue increases. The primary driver is building up more positive cash to go your capital spending. And then here is your capital plan now with a little bit more debt proceeds, which was $6 million. That lets you get through half of 2026. And then again, similar to water, you transition then to on a pay-as-you-go basis. So then you're not relying on issuing more debt. Go ahead. And then here are your reserves. It's fairly lean, right? We're not that much over your minimum. However, with wastewater, your wastewater revenue with most wastewater enterprises, it's almost 90% fixed coming in. So you don't have a lot of volatility when it comes to droughts or things of that sort causing drastic changes in your revenue recovery. So I'm not too concerned that you're just barely over your minimum with wastewater because of that. And then I'm just going to pause in case you guys have questions related. I know you said don't ask questions, but I'm going to ask because I'm done with the wastewater side before we go into next steps.
I had a question, please.
Yes.
Back under financial position, you said at existing rates, reserves would be used to cover capital expenses. But your third bullet says reserves will be depleted in fiscal year 2025. That's, you know,
Correct.
that,
Yes, so then what I'm saying is because
that's
you
kind
don't,
of,
because you don't have
a
a lot
problem.
of rate revenue coming in, you have to then rely on using your reserve balance to fund your ongoing capital, which then is going to deplete your reserves and generate a deficit based on with existing rates today.
okay.
It's based on not doing anything.
Yeah, right. No, I understand. So, okay.
Yeah, the one thing we don't do is say, oh, wait, then you have to cut your capital. We never say cut your capital. We say this is what's going to happen as you continue funding your capital needs. This is how we show the impact.
Right. Okay. So that's a real wake up call. That's all. That's a,
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. All right, and then next slide.
thank you.
And then in terms of next steps, we have the cost of service analysis and rate design. We actually already completed that. We already QC'd it, but we have to go through it with at the staff level to make sure we define where we want to land, and then come up with some maybe a couple alternatives for discussion with the board. And then we're gonna have the rate workshop on July 12th. And then that's where you can give me feedback on which one you want to select, or you might give me feedback that I want to see another iteration that has X, Y, and Z. And that's fine. That's part of the process. Then we'll mail out the notices by July 24th to have a public hearing September 13th and implementation date of August 16th. And one thing I didn't mention is all of those revenue adjustments in our modeling is already assuming a lag in implementation of October. So already accounts for that 3-month delay.
Okay, well, I do have a comment. I did speak with Michael yesterday after the finance committee meeting. I just gave it some thought. There's a couple things that I want to point out or focus on. It's the amount of, and I mean, it's about a capital improvement projects that we have on this list for the next 5 years. And I just think it's rather aggressive. What we're talking about is the 54.5 million for water, and then another 35.8 million for wastewater. And this is just over the next five years. So you together 55 and 35. And then that $90 million in 5 years. And really this list is $200 million long at least of things that need to be done. And we're calling this 90 million for the next 5 years critical. And I know staff, and we went to in the finance committee meeting, Michael and Jeff talked extensively on how much time our engineers, our operations manager, and everybody has put together in getting this list whittled down. And I actually asked what I don't like is the 25%. And I know that Habib explained that these aren't actual increases that every one of our customers will receive because of the variable amount of their bill. The 25% isn't exactly accurate. It's going to be somewhat accurate if he's across the board, a 25% increase in the first year, and then 16 in the 4 years. That's kind of hard to swallow. If we had a board here that hadn't been paying attention, and we've done rate increases and rate studies, rate studies every 5 years, whether we, and then we raise rates every 5 years as part of that rate study. We've done this 218, and I think we've been a fairly responsible board in continuing to raise rates. We certainly haven't kicked the can down the road, which was a term that came up in our finance committee meeting, and it's not the case. This board has, and for the boards for the last 10 years have paid attention to rates and have dutifully gone through this very, very tough process. And these town hall meetings, and we've paraded around the county and explained what we were doing. I'd like to see that 90 million, me personally, and if my board agree, or our board agrees, then fine. That 90 million is a tough pill to swallow, just as the 25% is in the first year. So I think Michael did just mention he's looking for ways of smoothing out that 25%. But it is common in the first year of a rate study to have a big bump in the first year to compound on for the next 4 years. It makes things easy for the debt coverage ratio, as well as getting things jump started on projects. I don't think we really need to do that. I mean, I think 90 million is awfully aggressive for 5 years. For this size of a board, and we can, Habib did kind of glossed over it, didn't really spend much time on it. But for a district of our size with 13,000 people, putting $55 million in 5 years is a big ask. And it's something that and I don't know that if I also know that if that many projects or there's 90 million projects that are in critical stage that they have to get done in the 5 years. In addition to that, there will be emergencies during these next 5 years of things that aren't on that $90 million list that will need to be addressed. That list will change, and the order of things that need to be done. And every district is in that same position. And you bite off. I mean, if we started at the other end, is what can our customers stomach, and come up with a percentage and back into it. It's not impossible to do a rate study that way either. It's not the way we're doing it here. It's not ideal, but I just want everyone to look at it, and I'm not making any suggestions, but look at that 90 million and look at that 25%. And I'd like to see if there is a way to smooth out the percentage increases, and if possible, reduce them, and maybe look at that 90 million and keep working on kicking a couple of those projects into the next 5 year term. That's all I got to say.
I have a question, Scott. 5 years ago when we did this, we had planned increases in each of the 5 years. But if I remember correctly, we did not implement the last
I
one.
think that was the one before.
That was the previous rate schedule.
Yeah, that was
So it was the 2017 rate.
That was when we developed the capital.
That was the rates that went into effect in 2013. We elected to not, even though we had gone through the 218 process, and we were approved to increase them. And I think 16, 17, and 18, we didn't do anything in those 16, 17, and 18.
It was just the last year of that rate schedule that the board declined to implement that last rate, which would have been a substantial rate increase. I think it was scheduled to be 9% on the water side. I'm not sure what it was on the wastewater side. But that would have actually have put the base rate for water where it currently is now back in 2018. Because the rate increases over the last 5 years were actually very small.
So we probably should have allowed that increase to go through back then. And we as the board at that time elected to not implement it, even though it had been approved.
So was there, forgive me if I have forgotten this, but was there an attempt in the last rate study to make up for that? Did you just forget it?
We just went back from the baseline.
Yeah, I don't think it didn't come into consideration. Right, Jeff, go ahead.
I guess one of the advantages to being here a long time is you remember each of the rate studies that you participated in, and up to 2013, the rate study, we had all our rates combined into one. Unfortunately, when the last rate study in 2007, implemented in 2008 was designed, it was based on new connections. because the county was going through tremendous growth in the early 2000s, 4, 5, 6, 7, 400 new connections a year. But unfortunately, you know what happened with the Great Recession. When we looked at the 2013 rate model, we put all our eggs into one basket, the capital R&R fund. That's where the money went to.
2008.
No, 2013.
Oh, sorry. I'm
2013.
Go ahead. Yes.
We didn't add any money in the operating fund. We put it all into R&R. And you're right, we had 3 scheduled increases for 3 years. Your board decided to defer the defer the third increase, the third year. So all the monies we have received from that point on in R&R have stayed the same. We did not touch R&R in the 2018 rate study. We only looked at the operating side. So the program funds that you're looking at right now for R&R were the ones adopted in 2013, 10 years ago. We have not added to that. And that's what we're looking at it this year because we are behind in capital spending. And that's what part of this program is. As Habib said, there's 3 major components. And water and sewer is a little bit different. Water, we have an operating deficit, so we have to address that. But we still have all the CIP programs. And trust me in this, that Damon and Charles, who is not here, I am probably the least liked person in this room when it comes to how are you going to be able to do your 5-year CIP program? Do you have the resources? Is it actually needed? We whittled it down to the bare minimum because a lot of these programs are at risk to failure. When it comes to the sewer, it's more on the capital side that's driving it. Again, sewer, all our capital expenses, our projects, with the inflation factors, supply chain issues and everything else have really grown in size. The project is basically the same, but the cost has increased over time. So when you look at these projects that we're including, if we would have done them 10 years ago, it would have been a much lower price, but we're not there. But the cost of the projects that you're looking at right now not only includes the cost of actually doing the work, but it factors in the inflationary cost. And Habib said next year you're looking at 7.4%, and then it kind of trickles down. So but right now we only have the limited R&R funding that we have that was approved back in 2013. So a good component of this rate increase helps provide additional funding for our capital program. And you're right, Scott, Director Adaman, back in 2010, you guys did a great job in preparing us to move forward. Now we actually have increased bandwidth to be able to do these projects. And we're excited about being able to do them. As Michael stated early on, this plan funds the projects that were identified in this plan, not anything else. And the concern that Damon has, the concern that Charles has, and engineering staff and all our operations is if we get critical failure of a project that we have deferred and not doing, it's going to cost significantly more money to fix it because you run to failure, your costs are higher. Plus, you're at the whim of contractors who have already scheduled all their work, and you're saying, hey, I need you to come in and fix this now. So it's not easy. Trust me, it is not easy to look at these costs that you see. And Director Adaman, we have taken into account your concerns about trying to level out the water side, and we're going to look as much as we can into this process and look at all the inputs, and so that we can try to achieve your goal. But it's going to take us some time. We can't do it today. It's and working with all the parties. But yes, we're looking at that as well.
I have a question. When we're looking at these CIP projects, are we looking at new, you're telling us new, do we have a mix of the new and the old? The ones that,
Sure.
yeah, because that is critical. That is critical. You can't just let the old
Exactly.
go.
Let's go back to Director Radaman's comments about the existing loan that we're looking at, the proceeds for the water side. we're basically going to fully fund 2 projects. The Jenny Lynn AB transmission line at $13 million. And then the,
Well, so we also have the B tank.
Yeah.
Tank and copper. Yeah.
Clearwell project, and that's $8.5 million. That's more than what we have funding for through the CIP, but we're backfilling it with expansion funds and R&R. So that 19 million, which we thought was a heck of a lot of money a year ago, really only funds 2 projects.
And to give you a sense of the change and why it's so hard to fund these projects now, that A to B transmission line in Jenny was in the CIP in 2018 when the last rate study was done at a projected construction cost of 3.5 million. And so, and that's not to say that we've done a lot of work over that period of time. And as Director Adamman correctly pointed out, it doesn't, just because it's in the CIP doesn't mean that it ends up happening on that schedule, because priorities change, circumstances change, other opportunities present themselves. So sometimes you have to pivot. So it's not a criticism that it wasn't done during that last 5 years. It's just an example of how much those construction costs change over time. And so even if it's possible to defer some of them, is it in the district's best interest is one of the questions. But I think one other point I'd like to make is, Damon's done and Charles just a phenomenal job in it's really been the last couple of years. It's not just going into this rate study of going back through repeatedly over the CIP and prioritizing based on, regulatory compliance issues, risk of failure, consequence of failure, just really sharpening the pencil on everything. And rolled out far more than we were comfortable with when we put the final CIP together for Habib to incorporate into this model. And I think one other thing to point out is just because at times in the last year or so, there've been questions about staff's capability to implement these projects. And I think Jeff touched on it a little bit, but we're there. We're still a little short-staffed. It's a challenge bandwidth wise to get through these at the rate that we're currently doing. But this year will be somewhere in between $15 to $20 million in capital spending, which is more than the district's done historically. But it demonstrates, I think, that we're already at the point where we can implement the CIP that we've proposed here.
Yeah, and I just wanted to highlight 3 projects equate to $31.5 million. So the A to B transmission pipeline project is an expensive pipeline, 4.5 miles, which is a replacement project. And then we have the B tank projects, which is Director Cicada saw, I think, a field trip a couple years back, the Redwood tank that's failing up in Copper. This project replaces that tank and rehabilitates the existing steel tank that's on site. And if you all saw the images I showed at the last board meeting of Larkspur tank being replaced, where you could see daylight through the empty tank, that's what we're looking at the B tank site. And that's what one component of the 5-year CIP that is just listed as tanks in the CIP is exactly that. It's going through and rehabilitating existing tanks so that they don't fail catastrophically. And so I just wanted to highlight that. It's not so much the magnitude of projects as it is the cost of each of these projects. They're getting more and more expensive. And yes, there is a tight bandwidth when it comes to the engineering department, but there's also not a huge glut of projects for that 54 million. Unfortunately, there's 5 or 6 over the next 5 years. They're just expensive.
And there may be less by the time you get to that 4 or 5 years, depending on inflation between now and then.
And that's very true.
Also, getting back to your comment on, that's a lot of money for a district of our size, but and this is one of the things that we need to be able to tell people is that, for that 4.5 miles, we're gonna benefit 1,000 customers.
Yeah. Yes.
Where if that 4.5 miles of pipeline was in San Jose, it'd be, 100,000 customers. It's just there's a huge difference there.
Now, the economy,
Just the way we're built.
and that's what I was referring to is the economy of scale here. And in our area and how much can how much can each customer shoulder in any given year as far as an increase?
Yeah, and I think one of the other considerations there is because from the district's perspective, we have to focus on what the engineering analysis tells us, what the rate study tells us in terms of the resources we need to responsibly fund the district. There are, I think, because of these affordability issues, affordability is, buzzword in Sacramento right now, and in terms of, pushing back, because we're not the only water district going through this. It's everywhere. And they're dealing with these cost increases. And so there are other programs that are coming online and have ramped up and that are able to provide ratepayer assistance that didn't exist before, because water districts we're hamstrung. We can't use rate revenue for that purpose. So other programs are coming to provide assistance to low income and ratepayers where this has the biggest impact. And we're going to be able to facilitate that to help offset that impact to the extent possible, but still at the same time, fully fund the districts and the district's needs. Because that's really where our focus is.
Okay, any further comments, questions? Well, thank you, Habib. Eric, we have another PowerPoint here from, or maybe Jeff, are you, where are we going to go through this other? Thank you, Habib. Thank you very much for all the information. Did you have any more questions for Habib? Okay.
Habib, do you have anything else to add?
I'll still be on just in case.
Great, thank you. At this point,
At this point, we're gonna take a quick break.
I like that idea, even better than me
We're gonna
talking.
come back in 4 minutes.
Thank you.
Give time for Bertha to saunter up here. And we don't need to wait for Director David.
What?
There you go.
Wow. There's an.
I think I'm gonna need it.
Okay, are we back on?
Oh, dang it.
Oh.
Okay, we're back from our break back in session. Jeff Myers has a couple comments to make.
You elevated me to director position? That's easier than what I do.
You are director, you're director of financial services, aren't you?
There we go. Your board, President Radaman, the rest of the board, I really want to thank you for allowing us and Habib to explain, you go through this financial plan model, and looking forward to coming back to you in the future. On May 24th, I will have to attend that remotely, as you're aware. I'm going to be out of the office for a good month or more. Now, all that being said, I want to bring Eric Scriven back up here to allow him to introduce himself, and Leslie, the discussion we were talking about, possibly talking about debt issuance and such. At this point, I think just about everything he's needed to discuss has been talked about already. I think we're in a really good place at this point. He'll be available in future meetings, but at this point, I'd just like to bring Eric up to say hello and introduce Leslie.
Okay, come on, come on up, Eric. And we are not going to go through his, Eric said I'm not going to go through his PowerPoint today, the NHA advisors PowerPoint that's been passed out in front of you. And just want to recommend, when we bring this back, the staple is in the wrong corner. And we do have a director who pays attention to that quite a bit.
I was gonna bring it up.
Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
Good afternoon, board president and members of the board and staff. My great pleasure to be standing here in front of you again, just to work on whatever we can do to help. I've been coming to this town, this board, for over the last 19, 20 years. So it's really a pleasure for me. I'd like to introduce Leslie Bloom, who is vice president with NHA Advisors. Say hello, Leslie.
Hi, good afternoon. Nice to be with you today.
She goes deep into the details, and I can assure you we're working very hard with Habib, who is a very good practitioner at what he does, just to make sure we understand the numbers. There's some interesting calculations when you do coverage, as an example, that we're working with staff, and we're going to parse through that a little bit more in detail, just to sort of understand and address some of the concerns of the board. And then the last thing I'll say is we know debt, but we are financial consultants, and we just want to be helpful in anything that staff directs us to do that could be helpful for the board and your constituents. So thanks for letting us show up again.
And Leslie and Eric will be at our future meeting in person, I understand, in the near future, correct?
Which one? I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
You know, I said that Eric and Leslie will be at one of our future board meetings in person.
Leslie, maybe not. She's
Okay.
down in Southern California.
Oh, bummer. Okay.
But maybe I'll get her on a plane. Come on up here.
All right.
That's up to you all.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, thanks.
Anyone have any additional comments? That's pretty much completes our agenda. We do have public comment coming up here. Is anyone else on the dais have anything to say? Public comment. Any public comment?
Just a quick thing, Director Thomas mentioned social media and kind of made a little joke about it. I didn't see an agenda till at least Friday afternoon, and that was 5 days before this meeting. And but when did this actually hit the social media, or when was this?
It was Friday. I think it was after, as soon as we were done with the finance committee meeting, we posted the agenda and made a post on Facebook about this meeting.
But we announced this meeting in our last meeting.
We announced, yeah, we've announced this one before, that's right. But in terms of actually pushing out notification of the meeting, it was Friday.
Okay,
Yeah, 72 hours per the Brown Act. Just
Actually,
as
so
usual.
we're usually on Friday is when our agenda packets go out for a Wednesday board meeting. This is a special board meeting, so the requirement is actually only 24 hours, but we wanted to push it out to Friday as we normally do.
okay, very good. And I have something else, but that it will be before, what, the 24th, and you said you're going to Washington after that, right?
We're going, yeah, we have a trip coming up to DC in the following week.
Okay,
Actually, week of Memorial Day, so it'd be the 29th through June 1st.
okay, very good, thank you.
All right, thank you, Ralph. Any further public comment? Okay, seeing none, move on to item 5 in our agenda's reports. General manager's report.
So since we just had a board meeting last week, I won't repeat all of those reports.
Thank you, Michael.
Yeah. Oh, I thought you loved my reports. I will say though, when we will be back on this topic on the 24th with if we've made any changes to the financial plan, plus presenting the rate design as the plan for the 24th, and we'll also develop some more of the public outreach. Not just the strategy, but some of the actual public outreach presentation, I think we'll incorporate into that on the 24th. So I will leave it at that.
Okay, and I did kind of cut off John's welcome and presentation, and this is where we would usually be doing stuff like that. If there's anything further for our new external affairs manager, any further comment? Jeff, you weren't here at the time. Would you like to welcome John? Okay, there we go. All right, we're all taking care of.
Would you like
John,
to welcome?
do you have any further comments? Okay,
President,
yes.
I just wanted to ask him if maybe he's changed his mind after.
So this is day 3 and that creates patterns. So I come back 3 times.
Okay. All right, welcome again. Thank you. Okay, board reports. Director Underhill.
Director Underhill. I am so thrilled to be going to the Aqua Conference next week. It's been several years since I've been, so I'm going to ask Director Thomas if he and his wife will take care of me when we're down there. Adopt me.
I think we could arrange that.
Oh, great. Thank you. No, I'm really looking forward to it. I looked over the agenda and I will be picking out the various sessions I'll be going to. And so I'm just really excited. And my question is, what do I wear?
Business casual
Should
would be my recommendation. And there'll be a lot, I think, one of the things we'll be focused on, and we always are focused on, but relevant to this topic, there's just, huge, a lot of discussion right now going on about infrastructure financing and the prospect of a water bond in 2024. And there's always a lot of vendors offering assistance on infrastructure financing. And so we're always looking under every rock on that front.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, that's me.
Director Davidson.
You just brought something up that I know I've spoken about pretty much every time we do one of these rate structures. I bring up this thought, but I mean, is there any thought of a countywide infrastructure bond that we actually propose to the voters?
It's a good question.
As a way to finance, I mean, not just I've always said there's $300 million worth of projects in the county, probably more.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a thought.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I know the other local water agencies are having similar experiences right now, just due to the aging infrastructure and the cost, the bidding environment that we're in right now. So, yeah, that's something
Well, it's a debate to have, I think, for the future. I mean, it'd be interesting to know if any other counties are doing it countywide or even city or whatever.
Yeah, we'll follow up on that.
So,
That's a great idea, Director
how
Davis.
come we never do it?
What? I know.
Anything else?
No, just that was enough.
Director Thomas? That's all you got?
I don't have anything to add to that.
Okay, and I have nothing, nothing to report. Besides that the Aqua Conference is next week. And the JPIA portion of the conference starts on
Monday.
Who are those guys running the issue? What are the names? How do you
There-
spell
There's, I don't know the spelling of them. There's 12 of them. There's a list on the JPIA website. Go check it out.
12 of
Yeah.
them? Oh.
I'm the voting member of our board though, so it doesn't make any difference what their names are. All right, next board meeting is Wednesday, May 24th, 1 PM here, and Wednesday, June 14th, 1 PM here. Thank you. This meeting's adjourned.